Good afternoon. My name is Ann Rushlow and I work here at SUNY IT. I'm the Executive Director of Leadership Mohawk Valley. What a great day we've had here today. I hope you've all enjoyed being here as much as we've enjoyed having you. Our speaker this afternoon is Mark Doherty from Aqua Vita Farms in Sherrill. And he's the owner and operator of Aqua Vita Farms, which is a commercial scale indoor aquaponic farm. Say that 3 times fast. That grows seafood and produce for sale to the restaurant industry. I looked on their website earlier today and 3 words stuck out to me: delicious, safe, sustainable. At least 2 of those 3 words I've heard in some of the presentations today. Certainly safe, certainly sustainable, probably delicious, although I didn't see the cupcake presentation. Mark considers himself the chief executive farmer at Aqua Vita, and they've been featured prominently in regional, national, and international news articles and have been recognized as a leader in the future of food production. And I'll let Mark tell you all about that. Mark actually holds 3 degrees, 2 of which are from right here at SUNY IT, a BS in business management and an MBA from right here, as I said, at SUNY IT. Please help me welcome our speaker, Mark Doherty.
Hi, everybody. Glad to see so many people out there today. And as Ann mentioned, my name is Mark. I own Aqua Vita Farms, which is a controlled environment agricultural facility utilizing the aquaponic farming method located in Sherrill, New York, which is just down Route 5 here a little bit. And you know, I don't really feel, and I was telling Ann, that I'm here today necessarily to plug Aqua Vita Farms. You know, usually when I'm asked to speak to the Garden Club of Rome or to the groups that I spoke to just the other day at MVCC with regard to economic development, a lot of it is sort of a rah-rah fest for my own company. And of course, it has to be, because if I'm not out there promoting myself, nobody else will be. And so perhaps maybe that's the first thing to touch on today, is that if we're going to be an entrepreneur, if we're going to take a business plan and turn it into something other than a piece of paper, we darn well better be our own biggest fan and our own biggest cheerleader. I always say, Billy Fusillo doesn't sell the most Kias because he has the best price on Kias. Billy Fusillo sells the most Kias because you believe he has the best price on Kias because of his advertising. And so I'm not here necessarily today to talk to you about Aqua Vita Farms. So if you want to know more about Aqua Vita Farms, I would encourage you to check out aquavitafarms.com. I would encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow me on Twitter at Aqua Vita Farms. Check out my YouTube videos about Aqua Vita Farms, some of which are about entrepreneurship and like that. But to here today, I believe that largely I was asked to come and speak to you because Aqua Vita Farms started out as a piece of paper in a classroom here at SUNY IT. What had happened was I'd gone back to school nights to get a BS. I have an associate's degree from Paul Smith College, which is where I went right out of high school. I worked in the restaurant industry for 15 years and found myself living down here in the Mohawk Valley, particularly Whitesboro. And I started going to SUNY IT nights to get a bachelor's degree. And as I was doing that, they had an accelerated master's program that I was able to avail myself of, and I had the grades and everything to get into the accelerated master's program, did well enough on the GMATs, et cetera. And so I entered that. And in doing that, of course, are most students that are here, are we mostly all business students, right? Can I just see a show of hands to see who's a business student as opposed to, you know, just a really crazy person who wants to be an entrepreneur? Because I oftentimes think there's a bit of insanity there for people who want to be entrepreneurs. So as part of the SUNY IT business program, we were required to read the Wall Street Journal. Now, the funny thing about the Wall Street Journal is that, one, it's like trying to read War and Peace or one of these great tragic novels, you know, all in one day. I mean, the thing's about 3 inches thick. So nobody can read the whole thing in one day. The other thing is that usually if it's news in the Wall Street Journal, it's news because somebody already made a dime on it. It's not news because you're about to capitalize on that news. So, you know, from the standpoint of business news, it's there because people are making money on it or people lost money on it. That's why it's in that paper. But it was in that paper that I saw this idea about controlled environment agriculture and aquaponic farming. And it was the summer right before my last semester for my MBA. And I had a little bit extra time on my hands. So I decided to start writing a business plan because I knew that my last course for my MBA required that I write a business plan. And so I'm here today to talk to you about that business plan and what I've learned about being an entrepreneur in the history of evolving that from a piece of paper into $600,000, $700,000 worth of investment into a 13,000 square foot former manufacturing facility that used to make spoons, forks, and knives and is now an indoor ecosystem, one of 4 in our nation, and it's located right here in the Mohawk Valley. So first of all, I want to say congratulations because, and again, I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet today. I don't fool myself. Being the last speaker right before everybody finds out who wins, you don't want to keep anybody too long, So congratulations to those, who have taken their own work life and their own future and their monetary dreams into their own hands by studying entrepreneurship, by writing a business plan. Congratulations not only to the winners, but also to the losers today, but to those that will see the dreams and concepts to the next level. Because win or lose today, there's still a next level. There's still a need to get up tomorrow and decide that this is what you want to do, and decide that you're fully committed, and decide that even though the judges, some of whom I know, I wouldn't take a lot of their opinions too seriously. Jack. They may not deem you fit. The bank may not deem you fit. And that brings me to my first point, never hear no. I shopped my business plan to 15 banks. 14 of them said no. One of those banks was a locally owned bank. I was there with a junior and senior loan officer whose arms I really had to twist to get that meeting in the first place. Because a lot of times the conversations would go something like, "Hi, this is Mark Doherty. I want to talk to you about my business plan where I'm going to grow fish and vegetables in an old factory, and people are going to pay me twice as much for my product as they do for everyone else's product in the entire world." Click. Thank you, but no thank you. We'll get back to you. A lot of we'll get back to yous. So I finally got this meeting with this regional or local bank. Halfway through, mid-sentence of my presentation, the senior loan officer got up and walked out of the meeting. Not, "Thank you, I'm done." Not, "This is the stupid." I mean, even if he had said, "Mark, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Why are you wasting my time? Why are you wasting Junior's time over here?" Nothing. Up, out. If I had let that dictate my belief in my plan, my belief in myself, we would not be having this discussion today. Now, that story about the banks ends with OSB, United Savings Bank, which when I walked in to the loan officer there and I sat down, about 5 or 6 sentences into my presentation, mid-sentence, again, he cuts me off and he says, "Mark, my wife buys nothing but organic produce, and she travels all the way from our house in Sherrill to Wegmans in Fayetteville, New York, to do so. I understand what you're talking about. Please tell me more." And I thought, finally somebody who sees the value, just like I see the value. And that's who ended up eventually closing the deal to allow me to open Aqua Vita Farms. Now, that being said, if we're out there to get traditional financing, if we're talking to the banks are going to ask you that you put everything on the line. They're going to ask you that you breach your LLC and personally guarantee the loan yourself. So what that means in my case is that if Aqua Vita Farms goes under, the bank and the USDA who backed my loan will come after my home. They'll come after the car. They'll come after the dog. I hope the dog. The dog's been crazy lately. But they will ask you to be that committed. The skin in the game, as they call it, right? And that gets me to my next point, is that you must be fully committed. Because I'll tell you a story about a guy who walked into OSB, talked them into giving him $238,000, put up $90K of his own, personally guaranteed, walked into OSB, signed his life away, got in the car, drove down to the factory in Sherrill, which is about 5 minutes from the main branch of the bank, walked into this building that I had signed the lease on that morning with a sledgehammer and a check bank full of money, and not really sure what I was going to do next. Because all of a sudden it got really real. You get so caught up in the making it happen phase that once, in the shrugging off the nose and not listening to the naysayers, because let me tell you, I don't know what your ideas are. I wasn't able to make it up today to hear any of them. I heard something about cupcakes. Whoever had the cupcakes, I'm not too happy with you for not bringing me cupcakes. But I will tell you this, that for every good idea you have, 10 people will tell you why it doesn't work, particularly here in the Mohawk Valley. And I don't know why that is. I was like that. I was what I call the Mohawk Valley or Utica, New York, Eeyore. Oh, poo, it'll never get better here in central New York. I'll never make any money here. I better take my education and run. That was my plan, actually, was to take, this state-funded, taxpayer-funded, really, really good education here at SUNY IT. Not to plug my alma mater, but I really feel like I got a great education here. But my plan was to take that all and run, and get out of Dodge, because, I couldn't make any money here, of course. But as I became committed to this project, I started to realize that certain cost drivers, right, like cheap power, cheap labor, that they were all here, and that I was here. So it just kind of made sense. I already had roots in the community. I already knew people. But we have to be fully committed to the project, because once the rubber hits the road, it's up to you. The banker, they're not going to come down and help you knock down walls or put them up. The VC, the venture capitalist that threw you a couple hundred G's for 50% ownership, they're not going to be down there helping you make cupcakes. They don't know the first thing about it, and they don't want to. They want to be investors. And so we have to be fully committed. I always tell people that, in my company, on Friday night, when the job isn't done, I don't go home. I stay until the job is done. And that level of commitment is absolutely required to be a successful entrepreneur. Now, that may also be why the banks require that you put up your home and your dog and everything else, because they want to make sure that on Friday night when the job isn't done, you're there doing it and not calling them up saying, I need more money. But we have to be fully committed. And if we're not fully committed to ourselves and to our project, then we should walk away. If there's that voice in your head saying, it seemed like a really good idea on paper, and man, people were really impressed with my idea of taking water and making cars run, but I don't know if that's actually going to work or not. I don't know if I can sell them. Then we need to walk away. The next point I want to make is check your ego and arrogance at the door. Don't be so arrogant. And a lot of people that know me personally, and Jack and Marty back there are laughing when I say that, because I'm one of the most egocentric, ego-driven people in the world. But don't be so arrogant as to not gain, seek, listen to other people's experience. When I was here at SUNY IT, I had the benefit of a great teacher who understood business, who had been teaching business for a very long time and had experience in business. I had the benefit of a lot of teachers like that, and I was able to tap into what they knew. But when I was seeking to learn aquaponics, aquaculture, which is fish farming, and hydroponics, which is growing plants without soil, I would spend time working for other people just to hear what they knew. I once spent 2 days filleting out about 400 tilapia by hand, which is a lot of work if you think about it, just so that the gentleman who had grown those tilapia would tell me how he grew them. We have to be willing to seek out the experience of others. A lot of times, I know, we get wrapped up in this idea, look at what I created, this 22-page masterpiece, the Leonardo da Vinci of business plans. And I bring it into banks, and I bring it into VCs, and people love it. And look at me. And guess what? The reality that you know every single thing about everything that you wrote in there is probably pretty slim. There's probably a little bit of fudging and BS. And that's just the truth. So I would encourage you to not allow that to take you to such a level where when you meet the fellow, and I'll give you an example. I met a guy in a gas station the other day. he says to me, "You're Mark Doherty, aren't you? You own Aqua Vita Farms in Sherrill." I was at the gas station in Sherrill. I said, yeah. And I'm thinking, he's kind of scruffy, older guy. And I'm thinking, I don't know what this guy wants. And he starts talking to me about aquaculture and aquaponics. And he starts dropping terminology like supernaut. I guarantee most people in this room don't know what supernaut means. I know what supernaut means. And I know that anybody that knows what supernaut means knows what they're talking about. Next thing you know, we end up getting together with this guy. He's actually run 3 different experimental aquaponic farms over the course of his life, all on the academic level and for colleges and stuff. But this guy knew what he was talking about. My point being that we never know when the next teacher is going to appear. So seek them out, particularly, seek out entrepreneurial people with, who are serial entrepreneurs or experienced with being entrepreneurs. Because once we get into it, once we start rolling, once we got the money, once we got the sledgehammer, once we got the walls going up, once, in my case, I had fish going into tanks and lettuce being produced and basil being produced and, transshipment lines being set up and lines of capital increasing and all of the things that happen once the business actually starts to function, I made a lot of mistakes. I made a lot of stupid decisions. I invested in things that I didn't need to invest in. Because ultimately, I didn't have that experience of speaking with a serial entrepreneur, of speaking with somebody who didn't want a piece of my action, but just thinks it's cool to help guys like me out because they've been there. And I recently met a gentleman named Martin Babinek, who runs Upstate Venture Connect. Martin had been a Silicon Valley guy, made a lot of money, came back here. He's an Ilion native, came back to Ilion, brought his family. Started Upstate Venture Connect. He's involved with the Tech Garden out in Syracuse. He's trying to start one here. And, one of the points that he made to me was, Mark, you need somebody who just wants to give you advice because they like to give advice and they know what they're talking about. You need to seek those people out. Because I guarantee that when you show those slick pro forma financials that, maybe you generated yourself, if you did, I would advise you get a second opinion. Maybe you went to the SBDC, they're a good source of help. My good buddy Dave Lerman, who I actually did my undergrad with here, is at the SBDC here, is a really smart guy. And so you take those slick pro forma financials and, you go to the bank and you talk to the bank about flour and frosting and decorations and cupcakes and how to turn cupcakes into birthday cakes and how to turn those into dollars. And a van, you're going to need a pink van, right, to drive around in, guaranteed. And so you go to that banker, right, a lot of whom I think are sitting right over here based on the looks they're giving me, because they're like, what's he about to say? But you go to that banker and you say to that banker about frosting and cupcakes and pink vans, and guess what? They don't know anything about frosting, cupcakes, and pink vans. They don't. I think they'll be the first to admit that. What they know about is the financials in the back of that document. What they know about is looking at your text and seeing if that lines up with the financials in the back of the document. What they know about is that their experience with funding startups, with funding operations, with refunding them, with getting them up and going. And looking at you, looking at the piece of papers that you've handed them and determining whether or not they think there might be some, as they like to say, interest there, right? Since the bank doesn't know what you're talking about, you darn well better be sure you do. I'll give you an example. At Aqua Vita Farms, I have a 300,000 BTU electric-fired boiler that heats water. It's a heater, okay? Costs about $15,000 to get it brought in and installed and everything like that. We've turned it on once in 2 years. That's an awful lot of money to be sitting in the corner collecting dust. That was a major mistake. One of the things where we didn't have things, or particularly I did not have things exactly honed in, was the fact that in taking this old building that we took, which, they used to make spoons, forks, and knives, it's an old shell of a building, and putting 462 grow lights in there, right? We didn't anticipate that the design of the system would actually heat itself. And that's what eventually happened, was that the way we designed the system, that the plant side actually heats the water for the fish. So we've never had need to turn this boiler on before. The bank, when I handed OSB, even the Yahoo that walked out on me that one day, he didn't know. He obviously didn't know. But the bank that finally, closed the deal, They didn't look at that and go, gee, Mark, do you really think that you need a 300,000 BTU boiler for 20,000 gallons worth of tilapia tanks? Because, in our experience, tilapia don't need that. They're not going to ever say that to you because they don't know. So you had darn well better know. And if that means taking a step back, because sometimes you get caught up in it and things start to go and you start to see the glimmer of hope at the end of the line, money and startup and getting your name in the paper and putting your shingle out and creating your cupcake or your widget, or in my case, your fish and your produce. And you start to get really excited. And maybe at that time you should take a step back and say, do I really know as much as I think I know here? Is this plan really as polished as it needs to be? Because ultimately, in the end, when the rubber hits the road, when you walk into the front of that building, sledgehammer and a bank full of money, check account full of money, your business plan is only as good as the piece of paper it was written on. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear right now. I know with all the work, all the effort, all the study, all the reading, all the writing, all the revisions, all the people telling you this doesn't work, that doesn't work, I know you probably don't want to hear that right now, but it's the truth. Now, when great football coaches go on to the gridiron against their arch rival, they don't walk out there without a plan. They don't walk out there having not watched the tapes on the quarterback from the other team. They don't walk out there debating still at the beginning of the game whether they're going to run a nickel or a dime defense. They don't, right? They have a game plan. You have a game plan. It needs to become a living document. And by that I mean things will change. You must change with it. I'll tell you from personal experience, my document called for the production of high-end lettuce mix and also basil. About 6 to 8 months into our first production cycle, the basil started to have issues. We weren't sure at the time why, but the basil started to have no shelf life. It would die after about 4 or 5 days on the shelf. Nobody is going to pay double for your product if it dies 10 to 15 days earlier than the cheaper competitive product. I guarantee that. So I started to get angry phone calls. I deal with restaurateurs and chefs, and they all have my cell phone number, and they like to call me up when they're unhappy. So the decision at that time was made to abandon the basil product until we knew why and got that under control. Well, at the time as well, the demand for our lettuce mix product was escalating, right? The decision that I should have made was to raise the price on the lettuce mix product to rein in the demand for it, increase revenue that way, and stick with the basil product until I got it figured out and keep rolling it out. Because we abandoned the basil product and we went gung-ho into the lettuce product, which was directly against what it said in the business plan, revenues did not catch up with expenses as fast as they should have. And we ended up having to look for a second round of funding. The business plan never called for any of that. The business plan was never evolved to do any of that. It was only within the last 6 months that I took the business plan and started the old business plan out and started looking at it again and saying to myself, how can this become a living document? Where are we right now? What is the reality of today? How does this change? What is still the same? What is working and what is not? And a big part of it is because, again, when you hit that road, when it gets going, and you thought in your business plan it was going to cost you 10 grand to bring your electricity up to par, and it really costs about 30, all of a sudden those numbers don't mean a whole lot. You need to be able to use it as a living document so that you can make changes on the fly and keep moving forward with some type of game plan available to you. So I want to thank you all very much for being here today, for listening to me today, and for inviting me to spend a little bit of time with you. I want to wish everyone good luck. I want to say congratulations. Again, not to today's winners, not to today's losers, but to those who get up tomorrow and do something with that win or do something with that loss. Because ultimately, if you don't hear no, if you're fully committed, if you look at it as a living document, if you keep getting up, even though there are days when it doesn't seem like such a good idea anymore, then you're truly an entrepreneur. If you're not capable of that, that's all right, because you're still going to be a great employee because you've managed to think like an entrepreneur. So I thank you all very much.